Here we are. We are one last season away from embarking on a brand new World of Warcraft journey. The start of a trilogy, one that will span nearly a decade, beginning with the War Within. But at this point, WoW has a huge amount of history, so this will be the first in a mini-series that will take a deep dive into some of the key characters. Today, we begin with one of World of Warcraft's greatest enigmas, and a personal favourite of mine, the Knaifu herself, Xalatath. We're going to look over her history, and then take a real hard look at her motivations and driving forces surrounding the heir to the void. Xalatath's true origins are still shrouded in mystery, one of the most ancient beings on Azeroth, the genesis of which dates all the way back to those ancient days of the Black Empire. Hushed whispers and disturbing rumours suggest the blade was once an old god, consumed by its ravenous kin. Or perhaps it was a claw, wrenched from the monstrous form of Y'Shaarj himself. None alive know the truth, or are too afraid to speak it. But even as the Black Empire was cleaved, and their dark gods bound in prisons beneath the world, the sentient blade would fall into obscurity. The first documented appearance was made thousands of years later, in the unlikely hands of a troll witch doctor of the Gurubashi tribe, Sando. Xalatath whispered to the troll, using his anger and pride against him. The blade convinced him to perform blood sacrifices at a dark mound of cursed land. After sacrificing all those who were loyal to him, he buried the blade in the mound and awoke something that had long slumbered. A giant Sithraxi general of the Black Empire was awoken and used the power of the blade to beat the drums of war once more. Pestilence and traumatizing visions were inflicted upon the trolls, and while they were eventually victorious, the blade had been seared into their memory. It had brought them to the edge of extinction, and would never be forgotten. The blade disappeared once more. That is, until it fell into unlikely hands. Modgud was the wife to the sorcerer Thane Thracian, former leader of the Dark Iron Dwarves, a devout practitioner of the arcane arts. She was immediately enthralled by the potency of the blade, so much so she did not care that no dwarf had knowledge of whence it came. She sequestered herself away for some time to unravel its secrets. What scant few glimpses of her there were, she was spied talking to the blade in low mutterings. It was still in her possession during the War of the Three Hammers, the same war in which she led the assault on the Wildhammer clan in the mountain keep of Grim Batol. The fighting was unimaginably fierce from both sides, but Modgud would single-handedly tip the balance, as she took the blade and wove an arcane spell, and then used it to cut her palm and make a blood sacrifice. She would release another unimaginable darkness upon the world. The very shadows themselves began to come alive. The very darkness in those mountain halls was twisted into horrors. None was safe from its ravages. Doom had come to Grim Batol. Kadros, leader of the Wildhammer clan, had only one final gambit to play. He would cut the head of the snake and make a push for Modgud to stall her unholy magic. It was through his sheer will that he managed this most unlikely feat, and he would use the last of his strength to see it done. He was face to face with the sorceress, hammer clutched in hand, but when she reached for her dark blade, it was gone. She thought it lost, but the blade had merely abandoned her to her fate. As she lay dying, she could be heard repeating only one phrase: "You promised," over and over. Once again the blade vanished from history, until its dark will leads it to the hands of a priest of the Holy Light. Natalie Celine attempted to use its power as a force for good. But as always, the dark secrets offered up by the blade came at too terrible a price. She learned the ways of shadow magic, but it took a toll on her sanity, and of many of her followers. Its dark will poisoned them against each other. When Natalie urged caution to use their newfound powers, the blade turned on her, convincing her followers that she was holding them back from attaining true power, and they murdered her in her sleep, as the blade vanished once more. However, the teachings of void magic she left behind would not. Despite the best efforts of the Magi of the Kirin Tor, many continued these shadowed practices in and out of the church, even to this day. Many priests would walk the path of shadow, treading on the fringes of its madness. But then a world-altering event happened, one not brought about by the sentient blade or its dark masters. The Burning Legion had returned to Azeroth, and the second invasion had begun. As forces mobilized across the world, one particular order of priests named the Conclave began to look for weapons they could use against the demonic assault. Rumors had begun to spread for some time. The Twilight Hammer cult were on the move and were in possession of the now infamous blade. All signs pointed to Tristful Glades, where, under the leadership of the Twilight Deacon Farthing, they were attempting to enact a ritual to awaken a slumbering Xal'atath. But there was one among the Conclave priests that were sent to stop the ritual, one that showed exceptional promise. Sensing the weakness of its current wielder, and the potential for a new bearer, Xalatath abandoned the Deacon to his fate. Instead of awakening the Xal'atath, it would instead devour its essence, greatly empowering the Dark Blade. This Conclave priest, blade in tow, would rise through the ranks to become the High Priest of the Netherlight Temple. While together, they would fight against the Legion. An eternal struggle was taking place as the blade whispered to its wielder, attempting to have them surrender to the madness. But the High Priest of the Conclave was victorious, using most of the blade's accumulated power to halt the corruption seeping out of the Sword of Sargeras, where, for another time, the blade would disappear from knowledge. Discarded, or lost, none can say. But this was not the last we would hear of Xal'atath. Scant few years later, a Tortullan collector had discovered the blade in Stormsong Valley. By sheer coincidence, or perhaps not, the blade knew of the Naga's plans to scour the world in a terrible storm, using 3 artifacts of great power, and she would lead the adventurer to them. The first artifact was a void stone, but a high elf named Inaris and her cult of the Deep Watchers were attempting to wield its terrible power. But the adventurer put a swift stop to that, cutting her down where she stood. But Xal'atath seized an opportunity. She used the void stones to possess the body, granting her flesh at last. Another happy coincidence? Or perhaps not. There was no other choice but to continue and find the remaining relics. One by one, the adventurer and their new companion did collect the relics. But in a twist, Xal'atath resumed her treacherous ways. She offered the relics and the adventurer to N'Zoth in exchange for her freedom from the blade, one in which the old god eagerly granted. But she was not sighted for some time. There was only vague rumour that she now went by the name the Harbinger. But after the events of the conclusion of Dragonflight, she has revealed herself once more. But she is both ancient and clever. If she has chosen to reveal herself now, then she has a plan, and it's very likely not going to end well for us. It is no exaggeration when I say that Xalatath is one of the most mysterious characters in all of World of Warcraft. Despite the wealth of information we have, we really don't know all that much. All we really know is what she chooses to reveal. There are a lot of theories surrounding her role, her origins. A lot of these theories are based on the whispers she gives to the player character during their journey through Legion together, and you can easily go and read all about them. But honestly, if you haven't, I totally recommend a Shadow Priest playthrough of Legion, and seeing them all for yourself in the moment. I could sit here and give you my theories, but honestly, it would just be adding to a huge pile at this point. And early on in this channel's life, we did a video about our Xalatath theory, and it hasn't really changed all that much since then. Xalatath only reveals enough to keep you hooked, and only enough to manipulate you into exactly where she wants. Instead, I'd like to take a slightly different approach and take a look at what we do know. While Blizzard warns us that the blade cannot be trusted, that it cannot be controlled, she however does show a surprising degree of devotion. Well, devoted to the Void at least. Its goals, and what she calls her Dark Masters. Every step she made was in service to this greater plan. During her interactions, there are numerous times she shows contempt for the other old gods, which she calls her brothers. A notable hint at her origins perhaps, but ultimately she will side with them if it serves the greater plans. She shows the same zeal and devotion to the Void that we see from Odin for the Titans, or the Naru toward the light. To quote Christopher Vogler, a well-written villain is the hero of their own story. I believe Xalatath is a fan favourite because of this very reason. Her story has all the elements of a hero's journey, except the outcome is often to our detriment. She doesn't give long expository monologues on her motives. Instead, we get glimpses behind the veil. She is doing what she feels is right for her future and the future of her family. We get to see a Void entity that is not in the throes of mania, but a hero in their eyes, and with the war within, one that is taking the final steps to securing a victory. This time, we might just be the final raid boss on her journey, and she has had a long time to prepare. While I may not have shared my theory in this video, I still love hearing all of yours. Feel free to leave a comment, or come tell us on Discord. Oh, and don't forget to come back anytime.